Welcome back, everyone. Before we dive in, make sure you drop your thoughts and the lessons you took from this story in the comments. And don't forget to like and subscribe. Let's get into it. My name is Janelle Foster. I was 32 when my marriage ended, and the first honest thing in it made a small plastic sound on my hardwood floor. I was carrying my husband's navy blazer upstairs for dry cleaning when a hotel key card slipped from the pocket and landed face up beside my shoe. The card was from the Harborside Grand in River Oaks, less than 20 minutes from our house in Houston. Room 347. I would have explained that away if I had not found the folded receipt tucked deeper inside. Dinner for two. Champagne. Chocolate-covered strawberries delivered to the room just after 9. My stomach turned so hard I had to grip the stair rail. A week earlier, Damon had stood in our kitchen looking tired and ashamed and asked whether I could move money from the private emergency fund I kept in my own name because a work payment had been delayed. I transferred nearly $8,000 to help him. He kissed my forehead and called me his piece. The receipt in my hand made that moment feel filthy. I had not just loved him. I had financed the lie. I had come home a day early from a work conference in Dallas because I wanted to surprise him. Damon thought I would be gone until Sunday night. He had encouraged me to stay for an extra networking dinner, which only made sense later. The house was silent when I walked in, too silent for a Saturday afternoon. No television, no music, no sign of him except that blazer hanging over a dining chair, as if he had come in, changed, and left again. I stood there shaking until instinct finally pushed me toward his office. Damon kept his personal laptop there. He had never changed the password because men like him mistake arrogance for security. I told myself I was looking for a reasonable explanation. Instead, I found 8 months of messages with a woman named Monica Vaughn. Photos, hotel confirmations, voice notes, flirtation that had long since passed into routine intimacy. One message sat in the center of the thread like a knife. I am tired of waiting. When are you actually leaving your wife? Monica knew about me. Damon did not seem ashamed of that. He seemed inconvenienced by my continued existence. I kept scrolling because once a marriage breaks open, you want to know how long the wound has really been there. 8 months of affair messages matched 8 months of business dinners, out-of-state meetings, golf weekends, and sudden late nights. Then I checked the accounts I could access. That was when romantic betrayal hardened into evidence. Damon had been moving money out of our shared savings account into a separate account I did not recognize. He had used the joint credit card we kept for household expenses and travel to pay for Monica's gifts, hotel stays, and dinners. Twice, he reimbursed himself from our shared funds after paying toward her rent. I sat in his chair with the screen glowing in my face and felt grief turn cold and organized. I did not call him. I photographed everything. I forwarded statements, receipts, and emails to a brand new encrypted account. I copied the message about leaving me after my birthday. Then I put everything back exactly where I found it, including the hotel key card. By the time he texted to ask whether my flight still landed Sunday night, I had already decided the first important thing. He would not know I knew. I told Damon the conference had added a Sunday workshop and that I was keeping my hotel another night. It was the first lie I ever told him that improved my life. I showered, packed a smaller bag, and left before he got home. I spent that weekend in a business hotel near the Galleria under my own name, ordering takeout, making lists, and refusing to waste my advantage on a confrontation that would only send him scrambling to hide evidence. During those 2 days, I began to understand that the worst part was not the cheating itself. It was how quickly every confusing thing in my marriage snapped into place once I stopped defending him in my own mind. Damon and I had met at a literacy fundraiser 3.5 years earlier. He was handsome, polished, and relentless in the way that can feel flattering before it becomes exhausting. He brought coffee to my office, sent flowers to my apartment, and learned just enough about my work and brand strategy to sound admiring. 6 months after we met, he proposed on a beach in Florida with so much certainty that I mistook confidence for character. I said yes without hesitation. 2 weeks before our wedding, Damon showed me exactly who he was, and I still married him. He asked me to meet him at his attorney's office and said it concerned preliminary documents for a house he wanted us to look at after the wedding. Instead, I walked into a conference room where Damon and his lawyer, Vernon Pike, sat behind a stack of papers clipped into neat sections. The prenuptial agreement was not so outrageous that it looked fake. That was what made it dangerous. It was written in polished, professional language. His premarital assets remained separate. Anything titled in one spouse's name would remain separate absent a written agreement. Alimony was severely limited. Legal fees in any divorce would be borne individually. Buried midway through was a fidelity and dissipation clause stating that if either spouse concealed an affair and used shared marital funds to support it, the other could seek reimbursement and challenge fee protections. Vernon pointed to the line acknowledging my right to independent counsel. Damon pointed to the wedding date and said there was no time. He framed my hesitation as doubt about us. I signed because I was 29, in love, humiliated, and not yet trained to believe my own instincts over his discomfort. The marriage did not sour all at once. It narrowed. Damon and I did maintain one shared savings account for household goals and emergencies because I insisted we should build something together. We also had a joint credit card for groceries, travel, and recurring home expenses. What he refused was real transparency. He would not open a shared checking account. He dismissed budgeting conversations. He said I was good at creative things and he was good at money, as if partnership were a consulting arrangement in which I existed for morale. The house we lived in was never truly our house. Before the wedding, he had implied we would choose a home together. Months later, he bought one in his own name with family help and acted offended when I asked why we had not made the decision jointly. Then came the smaller cuts. My job became cute. My salary became supplemental. My questions became criticism. I learned to shrink in practical ways. I kept a quiet savings account in my own name and moved a little from each paycheck into it. I kept important documents at work. I remembered the odd advice from my father's sister in Seattle, Aunt Bernice, who mailed a card every few years with lines like "keep your own account" underlined twice. On Monday morning, after my weekend in hiding, I sat across from attorney Celeste Harper with the prenup, a folder of evidence, and the distinct feeling that I might either faint or become frighteningly calm. Celeste did not offer pity. She read fast, asked exact questions, and told me the truth in the order I needed it. The agreement favored him. The independent counsel waiver was ugly, but not automatically fatal. The title language and fee provisions would make litigation expensive if he dug in. Then she told me what mattered in my favor. The dissipation clause mattered. The fact that Damon pressured me to sign, just before the wedding without meaningful review mattered. The long-running affair mattered. The use of shared funds mattered. "This is not a magic document, and this is not a magic fix," she said. "But it gives me leverage, and leverage matters more than drama." She told me not to confront him, to preserve metadata where possible, to list every premarital possession, to think through where I would live, and to move only when I could leave completely. I walked out of her office with no illusions and, for the first time in days, no helplessness. The next 3 weeks were the most disciplined of my life. By day I went to work, built campaigns, answered emails, and accepted praise from my boss, Valerie, who said I had sounded sharper in meetings lately. By night I smiled across dinner at my husband and watched him lie without blinking. I made spreadsheets of transactions, photographed statements, and forwarded everything to Celeste. She referred me to a private investigator named Rochelle Bennett, a former detective who spoke softly and missed nothing. Rochelle's first report came back with photographs of Damon and Monica leaving restaurants, checking into the Harborside Grand, and walking into her apartment carrying shopping bags. There was video of him kissing her in a parking garage with the relaxed ease of a man who thought he had controlled all variables. The second report hurt worse. It showed recurring transfers from Damon's separate account timed to Monica's rent cycle and expense reimbursements from his company that aligned neatly with weekends he spent with her. This was not a reckless affair. It was a funded parallel life. Damon had not merely betrayed me emotionally. He had budgeted for replacing me. The revelation that finally killed whatever tenderness I still had left came from Damon's own email. One night, while he was in the shower, I checked his personal account again and found messages with Vernon Pike discussing the timing of a planned divorce filing. Damon intended to serve me the week after my birthday because, in his words, I would be off balance emotionally and less likely to waste money fighting a contract she already signed. Another email discussed how soon Monica could move into the house after the divorce without creating avoidable issues related to adultery and financial tracing. I remember sitting on the closed toilet lid in our bathroom, reading that thread over and over until my face went numb. Damon was not improvising selfishness. He was executing a plan. He had already decided I would leave his life stripped of money, home, dignity, and momentum while he installed the woman he had been funding with our savings. When people ask what the deepest betrayal was, it was never only Monica. It was the cold certainty with which he expected my collapse. He believed he understood me so completely that he could schedule my destruction around my birthday cake. Aunt Bernice changed the weather around the divorce, but not the core strategy. A few days after I found Damon's plan, I received a call from a Seattle estate attorney named Calvin Waller telling me my father's sister had died and named me sole beneficiary. Bernice had never been close in a conventional way, but she had remained oddly present from a distance through cards, clipped articles, and once, after college, a book on women and financial independence with 3 passages underlined. At Calvin's office, I learned she had built serious wealth through early technology investments and real estate. After taxes and fees, I would inherit just over $24 million. It was enough money to alter every practical fear Damon had planned to exploit. But the inheritance did not hand me a victory I had not already begun earning. By the time I learned about it, I had found the affair, preserved the evidence, hired Celeste, retained Rochelle, mapped his transfers, and built an exit plan. What the money gave me was safety. I could fund the legal fight if necessary. I could move quickly. I could refuse any settlement rooted in desperation. Aunt Bernice's letter said only this in essence: do not waste freedom once you recognize it. Celeste's first reaction to the inheritance was not celebration. It was instruction. Keep it separate. Keep it private. Touch nothing publicly until the paperwork is locked down. I met with financial advisor Nadine Porter, opened accounts in my maiden name only, and placed every estate document in a safe deposit box Damon could never trace. Then I went back to work on the life I was leaving. I rented a 2-bedroom apartment in a full-service building across town. I hired movers for a weekend. Damon would be in Philadelphia on a verified conference trip. I made lists of what was mine before the marriage and what I was willing to leave behind. The inheritance meant I no longer needed anything Damon had ever used to signal power, but it did not reduce the emotional weight of walking through that house and seeing it clearly. The furniture had been selected to impress. The kitchen had become my unpaid stage. Even the bedroom felt curated for his comfort. I left with my books, family pieces, work files, clothes, art I had bought for myself, and the private certainty that the woman Damon expected to blindside him had already disappeared. I moved out on a Saturday while Damon was gone. The movers were efficient, discreet, and faster than grief. When the truck pulled away, I stood for a moment in the kitchen where I had once packed his lunches while he texted Monica in my line of sight and called it multitasking. Then I left a note saying I was staying with my mother for a few days because work had become overwhelming and I needed space. It was believable. It bought me 48 more hours of his ignorance. We filed on Monday morning. Not with a public spectacle. Not with the humiliating circus anger briefly tempts you to crave. Celeste wanted service clean, private, and indisputable. So Damon was handed the papers in a conference room at his office with security present and no room for theatrics. My phone started ringing 11 minutes later. He called, texted, emailed, and cycled through outrage, disbelief, and that paternal voice he used when he wanted to make me feel unstable. Before he asked whether I was serious, he reminded me about the prenup. Before he asked what happened, he asked what I thought I would gain. That order told me everything. I did not answer. Celeste had already instructed me that from now on Damon got counsel, process, and silence. By afternoon, Vernon Pike emailed to remind us that the prenuptial agreement limited my claims and that Damon intended to enforce every provision. Celeste responded in one paragraph stating that we would proceed and that discovery requests were forthcoming. That evening Damon drove to my mother's house because it was the only place he knew to look. My mother told him through the closed door that I was not there and that if he pounded again she would call the police. He left before officers arrived, but not before the neighbor across the street saw enough to form an opinion. The next court appearance was procedural, yet it shifted the balance anyway. Damon's side requested delay and privacy. Our side requested preservation of records, temporary restraints against unusual transfers from shared accounts, and a no-contact structure because of his escalating conduct. The judge gave him no lecture, which I appreciated. Real power is quieter than revenge fantasies. She simply set deadlines, froze the financial games, and made it clear that missing documents would be viewed very badly. Discovery took weeks, not hours, and during those weeks Damon's confidence began to curdle into panic. His bank records showed transfers he could not explain, charges to the joint card he tried unsuccessfully to call business-related, and reimbursements that placed Monica inside the financial skeleton of our marriage. His work expense reports made things worse. Once subpoenaed, they showed hotel stays, dinners, and travel he had disguised as client development. Rochelle's photographs gave those line items a face. Even Damon's language betrayed him. In emails to Vernon, he described me as non-essential to the real financial engine of the marriage, and assumed I would lack the money or nerve to sustain a fight. Celeste did not need to dramatize his cruelty. She only had to arrange it in chronological order. By the time mediation was scheduled, Vernon had stopped sounding triumphant and started sounding like a man trying to get his client out of a narrowing hallway. Damon, meanwhile, kept trying to reach me through cousins, former friends, and eventually his mother. Each attempt went back to Celeste. Each one weakened his claim that he wanted privacy and peace. The reckoning happened at mediation, and it was less explosive than I once imagined, which made it more satisfying. Damon walked in wearing the anniversary watch I had bought him after he claimed he could not justify buying it for himself. He looked tired, thinner, and deeply offended by the existence of consequences. Once we were in a private room with the mediator, he tried one final version of his old script. We had both made mistakes. I was humiliating him unnecessarily. Lawyers had poisoned what could have been handled privately. I let him finish. Then I slid a binder across the table. On top sat the Harborside receipt, the birthday divorce email, the transfer summary, Rochelle's photographs, and the reimbursements tied to Monica's rent. I found the hotel receipt 3 weeks before you planned to serve me after my birthday, I said. I know about Monica. I know about the money. I know about the house. I know exactly what you thought would happen to me. I am not here to bargain for scraps. I am here to leave cleanly. He looked at the papers, then at me, and for the first time in our entire relationship, he had no expression ready. What collapsed behind Damon's eyes in that room was not remorse. It was certainty. He understood that the woman across from him no longer occupied the role he had written for her. He could not charm me out of documentation or intimidate me out of sequence. The employment fallout arrived around the same time because his dishonesty at home had bled into his work. Once our subpoenas exposed his expense reports, his company opened an internal review into whether he had misclassified personal travel and entertainment tied to the affair. It was not glamorous fraud. It was small, repetitive, and easy to understand, which made it deadly to his reputation. Suddenly settlement looked attractive. Suddenly privacy mattered. Damon's first serious offer tried to buy my silence with money and a quick exit. I turned down the hush payment. What I wanted was reimbursement for the marital funds he spent on Monica, contribution to my legal fees, a binding non-disparagement clause with real penalties, and the fastest clean dissolution possible. The settlement was signed 11 weeks after filing. I waived any claim to the house. He reimbursed what he had drained, paid toward the costs he created, and accepted the clause that would later cost him every time his arrogance outran his caution. 2 weeks after the divorce was finalized, Damon tested that clause because men like him always assume rules are softer for them. A former mutual friend forwarded me a screenshot of Damon implying online that I had used outside money and lawyers to ruin an ordinary marital dispute. It was vague, but not vague enough. Celeste sent one letter attaching the settlement language he had signed. By the next day, the post was gone. An apology had been relayed through counsel, and the first penalty payment had been wired. I never responded publicly. I never had to. Enforcement is cleaner than argument. That moment gave me more satisfaction than any fantasy of yelling ever could have. Damon had built our marriage on the assumption that I would absorb his behavior and preserve his image. Now one reckless sentence cost him real money. Around the same time, I heard through channels I did not ask for that Monica had left him once his employment troubles became real. She called me once months later to say Damon had told her I was checked out, easy to discard, and too dependent to fight. She did not pretend innocence. I did not offer absolution. Truth arrived late, but it arrived. Life after the divorce did not become perfect. It became mine, which is better. I stayed at the marketing firm where I had nearly forgotten my own ability, and within months my work sharpened in a way everyone noticed. Valerie told me I sounded like myself again in meetings. I used my inheritance carefully. First to secure my own life, then to build something I wished had existed the day I found the key card on my floor. The Foster Initiative began in one leased office with 2 staff members, a volunteer bookkeeper, and a mission simple enough to survive repetition. Emergency legal funding, temporary housing assistance, job readiness support, and financial literacy for women leaving financially coercive or controlling relationships. Aunt Bernice's money funded the doors, but strategy and labor kept them open. The first client we helped relocate safely carried her documents in a grocery bag because she thought a briefcase would look suspicious. Another whispered when she described her husband checking every charge on the card he gave her. I recognized the look on their faces immediately. It is the expression of someone trying to become practical before she is allowed to fall apart. Around that time, I met Donovan Pierce at another nonprofit event and nearly walked into him while balancing a folder and a glass of sparkling water. He was an architect, attractive in a thoughtful, human way, with a warm smile and the habit of pushing his glasses up when he got excited. He asked me to coffee, and I said yes because he seemed straightforward. During that coffee, he listened more than he performed, which after Damon felt almost exotic. I told him early that I was recently divorced and not interested in being rushed toward dependence by anyone. He nodded and said that was fair. Then he proved it by behaving that way. He did not flood me with declarations or try to become the center of my recovery. He asked questions about the initiative, offered to review potential building plans when the time came, and admitted simple facts plainly, including the one flaw that kept him from ever feeling like a fantasy reward at the end of my suffering. When work overwhelmed him, he vanished too far into it. Not into lies, not into other women, just into overfocus and silence. It was annoying sometimes. It was also real, and reality mattered to me more than polished perfection ever would again. Damon's world kept shrinking while mine got busier. I did not chase updates, but gossip finds the woman who leaves a man like him because people want the moral geometry confirmed. I learned his company forced him out over misused expenses and dishonesty tied to internal reviews. I learned he downsized his life dramatically. I learned a former colleague told someone at a luncheon that Damon's biggest mistake was not the affair itself, but the certainty with which he believed I would stay easy to manage. That comment stayed with me because it was true. The cheating, the money, the legal planning, the birthday timing, even the house all came from the same rotten premise. Damon believed my devotion meant weakness. I had almost believed it too. The Foster Initiative gave me daily proof that this was not a private flaw in my marriage, but a pattern in far too many others. Women arrived in my office with brilliant resumes, hidden savings, and the same haunted question in different words. How did I let this happen? The answer was never stupidity. It was erosion. It was being taught slowly to apologize for needing room. The social consequences for Damon tracked the exact shape of what he had done. In corporate circles, he became the man who blurred personal and professional money for an affair and then tried to paint his wife as irrational when the records surfaced. A former coworker named Curtis told me over coffee that nobody in Damon's office believed the story he tried to sell after the settlement. Too many people had seen the review start before the divorce finished. Too many had noticed how carefully he used words like misunderstanding when the real issue was long-term deception. His parents, who once treated marriage like public branding, had to step in quietly to help him stabilize basic expenses. He was not destitute, and I do not need him ruined to feel whole. But he lost the polished life he had treated as proof of superiority. That mattered because it made the consequences proportional. He did not suffer because I hunted him. He suffered because the habits that wrecked our marriage also wrecked his work, his credibility, and eventually the version of himself he had spent years curating for other people. The Foster Initiative expanded more slowly than people now assume. The first year was not glamorous. It was lease negotiations, intake forms, late grant reports, nervous donors, and women showing up with children, manila folders, and no safe place to sleep that night. But the work held. We helped one client secure temporary housing and legal counsel within 48 hours after her husband emptied their checking account. We helped another recover enough financial documentation to challenge a coercive settlement she had nearly signed in fear. Those victories were not loud, yet they restored something in me that Damon had spent years eroding. Every time a woman left our office with a plan instead of a prayer, I felt the story tightening into its true shape. The betrayal had been personal, but the recovery became larger than me. Aunt Bernice's money gave the organization reach. My own experience gave it precision. I knew which details mattered because I had once needed someone to tell me exactly what to preserve, what to secure legally, what to ignore, and when to move. That kind of knowledge is not glamorous. It is survival made teachable. Donovan and I moved carefully, with schedules that did not always align, and with the ordinary friction of two adults who had full lives before they met. Once he missed a dinner because a project site crisis swallowed his evening, and his phone stayed buried in his jacket for hours. Old panic rose in me so fast it almost embarrassed me. But when he showed up at my apartment apologetic and exhausted, he did not gaslight me or make my reaction the problem. He listened when I said silence could feel loaded because of what I had lived through. He told me work had long been his safest hiding place when stress hit. Then he adjusted. That mattered more than never making a mistake. Later, when he was offered a major job in Portland, he told me before he accepted it and made no demand that I follow. He said he wanted the job and wanted me, and if long distance was too much, he would rather hear that truth than pressure me into sacrifice. I nearly laughed from relief. Healthy love sounds shockingly calm when your reference point is manipulation. We tried long distance because it fit the lives we had actually built, not some sentimental script where one person always folds first. A year after the divorce, the Foster Initiative had helped enough women that I stopped measuring success in abstract numbers and started measuring it in small practical miracles. Keys handed over in discreet envelopes, first paychecks after job training, women signing their own leases, women opening bank accounts without whispering. I testified before a legislative committee about emergency access to marital financial records during separation. I learned how to tell my story without performing trauma for strangers. Damon made one final mistake around that same time by telling someone at a networking event that I had used inherited money and lawyers to destroy an ordinary marital disagreement. The comment came back to me within 2 days. Celeste sent another notice. Damon's counsel paid the contractual penalty quickly. That was the moment I knew the old version of my life was truly over. Not because he had finally suffered enough to satisfy me, but because his words no longer had the power to rearrange my day. I forwarded the notice to finance, approved a housing grant, and went to lunch with Valerie to discuss a campaign launch. He had become administrative. There are endings sharper than vengeance, and one of them is irrelevance. One rainy Tuesday afternoon, a woman named Angela sat in my office with a folder of bank printouts, photographs, and a copy of a prenuptial agreement she had signed under pressure 6 days before her wedding. She kept apologizing for crying because she thought competence and grief could not exist in the same body. I told her they could. I told her to breathe, and then I gave her the map I once had to build while bleeding. Preserve records. Secure housing. Move money legally. Build a timeline. Choose counsel carefully. Do not confuse noise for power. As I spoke, I realized that this, more than Damon's decline or the settlement or the money, was the sharpest closure I would ever get. He had tried to reduce me to a cautionary footnote in his life, an obedient wife discarded on schedule. Instead, he became the reason I learned exactly how to help other women refuse the same fate. That does not make the pain noble. I do not romanticize suffering, but I respect what I built with it once it was mine to shape. Donovan came back from Portland one weekend with a small velvet box and saw me tense before he even opened it. He smiled and said, "This is not a trap." Inside was a simple ring, not an engagement ring in the traditional sense, just something he said looked like me because it felt strong without trying to impress anyone. He told me he did not need marriage to validate what we were building, but he wanted me to know he was in it for the long term if I was. No deadline. No demand. No emotional ambush disguised as romance. I put the ring on my right hand and told him that was what commitment looked like to me now, chosen, honest, and free of coercion. He laughed and said architects appreciate structural clarity. We still have separate apartments. We still have different careers and different pressures and occasional arguments about schedules. None of that threatens me. The threat was never ordinary difficulty. The threat was domination disguised as devotion. Once you learn the difference, your whole life gets quieter and stronger at the same time. I did not ruin Damon. He ruined the life he believed he could manage like a private acquisition. He cheated because he was selfish, stole because he was entitled, lied because he assumed charm would always beat documentation, and panicked because dignity in a woman looked like rebellion to him. What I did was simpler and, in the end, more devastating. I paid attention. I gathered proof. I stayed calm longer than he did. I moved first. I refused to let his version of me become the legal or emotional record. Aunt Bernice's inheritance gave me safety, and I am grateful for it. Celeste gave me structure. Rochelle gave me admissible truth. My mother gave me shelter. But I was the one who had to walk through the whole thing with my head up and my mouth shut at the right moments. That matters to me because every victory worth keeping is partly built by your own restraint. Damon believed the prenup would leave me empty. The affair would stay compartmentalized, the money would stay hidden, and my love would keep me obedient until he no longer needed it. He was wrong about every single part. Sometimes I still think about that hotel key card hitting the floor. Not because I miss the woman I was before it, and not because I wish the betrayal had never happened. I would never call that pain a gift. I think about it because that tiny sound was the first honest thing in my marriage. It was the first moment the story Damon had been writing around me failed. I left with my dignity, my name, my work, my future, and the clear knowledge that the wife he thought easiest to deceive had outplanned him, outlasted him, and walked away without begging. The life he tried to protect from me was the small one. The life I built after him was the real one. Now, when I lock my own front door at night, in a home chosen and paid for on my terms, I do not think about revenge. I think about completion. I think about sequence. I think about the women who still walk into my office carrying evidence in grocery bags and whispers in their throats. Then I open the next file and get back to work. If you enjoyed this story, please like, comment, and share this video with your friends. Subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a powerful story drop.